An article came out stating that there's a possibility that David Savard could get traded from the Montreal Canadiens. We'll be talking about that, plus former Tampa Bay Lightning member, current Anaheim Duck Alex Killorn said that he would love to play for Montreal, his hometown team, before his career is done. All that and more on this edition of Habs Digest. But before we get into it, you guys know what's coming. This video is sponsored by Rentals.ca. Rentals.ca is Canada's largest rental networks. You want a condo, you want a house, you want an apartment, you can get any rental you want.
Everywhere in Canada, whether it's Elmer, Quebec, all the way to Victoria, BC, and everywhere in between, Rentals.ca has you covered. Their website's really clean and easy to use. And what I like when checking it out is that their maps are so intuitive, really easy to use. You really look for the neighborhood that you would like in the city of your choice, and you'll see great listings there.
Yeah, and for those of you who've been watching the channel for a while, you know that I've used this website. I use Rentals.ca to help find my apartment in Quebec City, and honestly, I couldn't be happier with the place. So just in general, if you guys are looking for an apartment, a house, anything, Rentals.ca got you, and you've probably seen their billboards everywhere, right? They're a big company. They're Canada's largest rental network. Have a look for the billboards. But you don't even need to look for the billboards because there will be a link in the description and in the pinned comment redirecting you to Rentals.ca. If you want to show us some support, tell them that we sent you. All right, Jesse, before we get into these trades and Alex Killorn and stuff, I want to talk about a Habs prospect, and that's Bogdan Konyushkov. And you guys might not really know Bogdan Konyushkov, but you probably should if you watch the behind-the-scenes draft video. Bogdan Konyushkov was a 4th-round pick this year for Montreal, and he impressed in his first KHL game. Reminder, he is 20 years old, and he led his entire team, Torpedo Nizhny Novgorod, with 25 minutes of ice time. Everyone else on the team was just barely getting above 20. The next youngest guy is Anton Silayev, who had 19 minutes as a 17-year-old. By the way, he's kind of crazy. He's 6'7" and 17 years old. Pretty nuts. But Jesse, how impressive is it that a 20-year-old, when in a league where a lot of the time they don't like to play some of their younger players, is getting 25 minutes of ice time in his season debut?
This is very incredible to see from our recent D-man draft pick that we had just in that 4th round. We've seen even young guys, even if you're stars, we saw Matvei Michkov even kind of getting benched, not getting that ice time. So it matters a lot, right, that you can really play. And I think what they're seeing in the KHL is a lot of what our scouts, what the teams of our management were saying. As we know on that recent behind-the-scenes draft video, they were really big on him. Yeah. He actually sparked quite a bit of conversation, and basically more or less what they're saying, if he wasn't Russian with the numbers he was producing, he probably would have been a 2nd round pick very easily, right? So I'm glad that we're really keeping an eye on this guy. And even though he does have that contract until 2027, I don't feel like that's written in stone. I do see a world, Josh, where like we get into our contention window and Bogdan, he decides to himself, you know what, I'd like to be a part of that. I'd like to come to Montreal, compete for that Stanley Cup. I know I'd really like to see that.
I would too. I mean, it's not crazy. We've seen it with some Russian players coming over to the NHL. And honestly, yeah, even if he stays till 2027, give him 4 years to develop, playing a lot of ice time already at 20 years old. By the time he's 24, 25, and the Habs are entering their contention window, if he's proven he's good in the KHL, you got to imagine Montreal's going to do everything they can to bring him over. So he's definitely someone to keep an eye on this season. Now, Jesse, let's get into this Alex Killorn talk. So Alex Killorn recently was on the Raw Knuckles podcast with Chris Nyland, and they asked him a few questions. Of course, Alex Killorn grew up a Montreal Canadiens fan, and he had this to say. One player they may be looking to acquire in the future, this is talking about Montreal, is Alex Killorn. He will earn $25 million over the next 4 years, and after that, he seems open to joining the Montreal Canadiens. And on the Raw Knuckles podcast, he said that they were not one of the teams that contacted him this summer. No surprises there. But he'd be willing to join the Canadiens to close out his career. He was former teammates with Martin St. Louis and Vincent Lecavalier in Tampa Bay. They're in the organization now. The only problem, Jesse, is he's 37 at the end of his deal. However, he has been such a consistent player his whole career. Do you see a world where maybe at the age of 37, if he's still solid, Montreal swings for one of those 1 or 2 year shorter term deals like they maybe did with Monahan to try and get a veteran guy, Stanley Cup pedigree, in cheap for the Habs contention window?
Now, this is wild, but there is a chance for sure.
Yeah.
If you'd really just look at what he's done over the course of his career, he's been able to just stay remarkably healthy, be incredibly consistent, and his game has aged like fine wine, basically. Like, we're talking last year, 25 goals, 64 points. Getting later on, he's a vet now in his career, but make no mistakes about it. He can play. 2 of his best years have been his 2 most recent years, right? So just an incredibly talented player. Obviously, always nice to hear a multi-time Stanley Cup winner wanting to come. And kind of like Mike Matheson in a certain way, where, from the area, from the West Island. We see in this case here with Killorn, where he's from Beaconsfield, very close by to where Mike Matheson is from. It's nice them to want to be part of the organization, kind of makes sense. This is a team that they're going for growing up, and then kind of to have it full circle, to come back home and to play. And I mean, if he can really continue to take care of himself as he's shown, and kind of keep producing, maybe having that vet presence at 37, which is incredible, with a guy with that much experience, what he brings to the table, you definitely want to consider it.
Yeah, like and it's not impossible for him to still be contributing at that age. Like you said, like there's a lot of players in recent years that have maybe been playing a little bit longer into their 30s, and like you said, his game is the type of game that should age well. Now, this is a long way in the future. By this point, we'll have Bogdan Konyushkov and Alex Killorn coming over at the same time. But it's possible, right? I mean, the dude has just been such a solid player now. There's also the possibility that they try and trade for him at some point in his contract, but at the cap hit he's making, I just feel like they probably won't do that with Anaheim. But regardless, it's an interesting thing to keep an eye on, and my favorite thing from the whole interview is how he said how much he hated the Bruins growing up, so big thumbs up for me. But the final topic today, Jesse, we're getting into a current HAB, a guy that is on the team, not someone that might be on the team in the future. That is David Savard, and there might be some trade possibilities for David Savard. Now, look, Montreal's right-handed defense, we like to say it's deep, and in theory it is, but this year, maybe not so much, right? We have Jonathan Kovacevic, Justin Barron, Harris can play the right side, and we have Logan Mailloux coming up, and of course David Reinbacher, whose status is still up in the air. But David Savard is kind of the de facto number one defender right now, and according to an article by Marc Dumont, there's potential for a trade involving David Savard, though he does mention that his advanced analytics are maybe not what some other teams would want, especially for a 32-year-old defenseman. He still brings value, and he's still the de facto kind of first pairing guy for a reason in Montreal. He has very solid defensive play when he's paired with a partner that complements him well. That wasn't Cayden Guhle this year, but his numbers were much better with Mike Matheson. Do you see a world where Kent Hughes maybe, instead of trying to trade a forward like Dvorak or Armia, maybe tries to clear some cap, open up that, defensive pipeline by trying to ship out David Savard?
Absolutely. And I think if things are kind of progressing in the way that they are, there's a very high likelihood that David Savard is traded before this year's trade deadline. I think definitely Kent Hughes is actively shopping, but I think he's wise to not be too quick on this, because you don't really want to count your chickens before they hatch. Obviously, it looks like we got some great prospects coming on that right-hand side, some great players already in the system getting that ice time, but you really want to make sure of what you have, at this first, but at the same time, I feel like Kent Hughes very much recognizes, just by his drafting, that there is kind of a new school, a new wave of kind of defensemen, right? And it's not just David Savard, but like a lot of defenders that play a similar game to him, they're seeing that their overall numbers, their analytics are just going down, right? It's really changing a lot of the ways that defensemen are playing in this league, right? So I think Kent Hughes, who's really got the pulse on trends in this league, I think he wants to kind of change that sooner than later. We're not on a huge rush. He does provide a lot of experience, but I think it is something that would need to get done sooner than later.
Yeah, and again, part of the difficulty is that it's not easy to trade a guy like David Savard. Like, I feel like he's definitely on Kent Hughes' mind, but someone like a Casey DeSmith, Yoel Armia, or even a Christian Dvorak are definitely higher up on the list. And if Savard is to get traded, that's why I kind of said in the little title card, it's probably this season, like maybe around the deadline if a team's looking for Savard. I feel like he's not the kind of guy you use your salary retention on at this point. Do you think you'd have to pay to get rid of Savard? Do you think there's even a team that would take him on even if they gave up a 5th-round pick? Because I feel like you wouldn't have to pay for it. I feel like some team could use his services, especially if they're just looking for that veteran presence who is solid enough that you can rely on him every single night, right?
And I think that's the only thing holding up this, is because we just don't want to kind of fill in that other salary cap, kind of retention sort of thing. You got to feel like otherwise there's probably a high likelihood that this has been done kind of already. But at the same time, he still brings something to the table for sure. I think teams may be getting a little bit closer to that playoff, kind of looking for, because he's shown in the past that he can be a good kind of playoff defender, right? Because that's the style of game that suits him, right? So I see a high likelihood of that being around that time. But Kent Hughes, he's really going to be patient with it, I think, for good reason, right? We want to see what we have right now, where we're not exactly while we're trying to be more competitive this year, we're not trying to just, we know that a roster isn't constructed to kind of be that president winning kind of club, right? So I think that just being patient with it, and I think definitely the right trade will come up.
Very well put. Definitely something to keep an eye on, like most things we talk about on this channel. But yeah, don't see it coming soon. But don't be surprised if before this time next year he is no longer a Montreal Canadian. But that'll do it for this newest edition of Habs Digest. If you enjoyed, leave a like, comment, subscribe to the channel. Help us on our road to 10,000 subscribers. We'd really appreciate it. I'm Josh Gosse for my co-host Jesse Poirier. We'll catch you in the next one.